The tropical sun illuminated the busy streets of Manila as Manny Pacquiao returned from a long international trip. Exhausted but always attentive to his fans, the legendary boxer waved to people who recognized him while his driver navigated through the chaotic traffic of the Philippine capital. That morning, nothing indicated that a simple envelope, deposited in his mailbox, would profoundly change his perspective on one of the most intense rivalries of his career. In his private office, decorated with memorabilia of his historic conquests across 8 weight divisions, Manny observed the yellowed envelope with trembling handwriting. The sender, Datu Hidalgo, was a name he hadn't heard in almost 15 years since their bloody confrontation at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. That fight had ended with Pacquiao victorious by technical knockout in the 10th round, but what few knew was the resentment that grew afterward, fueled by Hidalgo's bitter statements to the press. The champion's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope, revealing 3 handwritten pages, the paper already worn with tear stains. The first lines explained that Hidalgo was writing from a hospital bed in Davao, where he was fighting terminal cancer that consumed his final days. The letter wasn't a common apology, but a confession that no one could imagine, not even Manny himself. The boxer's eyes scanned the painful words that revealed how Hidalgo, consumed by envy after the defeat, had hired people to sabotage some of Pacquiao's advertising contracts in the following years. The confession included details about false rumors spread throughout the boxing community, attempts to tarnish his reputation with international sponsors, and even a veiled campaign to question his Christian values in the conservative media. The last paragraph of the first page, however, contained an even more shocking revelation. Hidalgo revealed that he had been diagnosed with the terminal illness just 3 months after that historic fight. Out of pride, he kept the diagnosis in absolute secrecy, allowing the world to believe that his professional decline was simply the result of the devastating defeat, when in fact, his body was already fighting a silent battle, much harder than any confrontation in the ring. Sitting in his leather armchair, Manny placed the letter on the table and closed his eyes, mentally transporting himself back to that night in Las Vegas. The deafening crowd, the blinding lights, and the palpable tension that preceded the confrontation between 2 of the greatest Filipino boxers of all time. Datu Hidalgo had emerged from the slums of Cebu, just as Pacquiao had risen from poverty in General Santos City, and both carried on their backs the hopes of entire communities. The confrontation had been promoted as Sons of the Philippines, but the rivalry took on bitter dimensions in the weeks leading up to the fight. Hidalgo, always eloquent and provocative, crossed boundaries by publicly questioning Pacquiao's patriotism for training in the United States, insinuating that the champion had forgotten his roots. Those words deeply hurt Manny, who always made a point of returning to the Philippines after each victory, sharing his fortune with the less fortunate. The 3rd round of that fight remained vivid in Pacquiao's memory, the moment when Hidalgo's left hook hit him with devastating precision, making his knees weaken for the first time that night. The world seemed to silence for seconds as he recovered, gathering strength to continue. No one in the arena could imagine that, while Hidalgo celebrated that near knockout moment, malignant cells were already silently multiplying in his body. From the 5th round, Pacquiao took control of the fight with his characteristic speed and precise combinations that gradually diminished Hidalgo's rhythm. In the 10th round, a merciless sequence of blows left his opponent staggering, forcing the referee to stop the bout. The image of Hidalgo defeated, with a bloodied face while Manny raised his arms in celebration, was immortalized in sports newspapers worldwide. In the following years, while Pacquiao's career continued to rise, Hidalgo gradually disappeared from the spotlight, refusing interviews and distancing himself from the boxing circuit. The sports press attributed his disappearance to an inability to deal with defeat. But the letter in his hands now revealed a different truth. Hidalgo had returned to his hometown to face cycles of chemotherapy, protected by the silence of family members and a few loyal friends. The 2nd page of the letter brought even more painful revelations. Hidalgo described how he watched, from his hospital bed, Pacquiao's subsequent victories against international boxing legends. Each new title conquered by Manny deepened his resentment, not just for the defeat suffered, but for the lost opportunity to continue his own journey in the sport. The disease had stolen his future, while the world celebrated his compatriot's achievements. With handwriting that became more unstable with each paragraph, Hidalgo confessed to orchestrating a defamation campaign against Pacquiao through fake social media accounts and contacts with sensationalist journalists. For years, he fed false stories about alleged extramarital affairs, use of prohibited substances, and tax evasion, all driven by a bitterness that grew proportionally to his illness. The remorse came unexpectedly, Hidalgo explained, during an afternoon when he was watching a documentary about Pacquiao's poor childhood and his efforts to build affordable housing in provinces devastated by typhoons. In that moment, confronted with his rival's genuine generosity, something broke inside him. The letter revealed that, in the last 2 years, he had secretly donated most of his savings to supplement community projects initiated by Pacquiao without ever revealing his identity. Through tears that now stained the letter in his hands, Manny read how Hidalgo had recently discovered that his youngest son, Raymart, just 12 years old, dreamed of becoming a boxer like Pacquiao. The ironic fate of having a son who idolized his greatest rival became the final blow to his wounded pride, forcing him to reevaluate years of resentment while watching the boy repeatedly viewing videos of Manny's fights. The final paragraph of that page contained a request that Pacquiao would never have expected. Hidalgo wasn't seeking forgiveness for himself, but asked that Manny, after his passing, might occasionally check on Raymart's progress in boxing. The boy trained in a precarious gym in Davao, using improvised equipment and worn gloves, but showed a natural talent reminiscent of Pacquiao himself in his youth. The request wasn't for sponsorship or special favors, just for the attentive eye of someone who deeply knew the rocky path ahead. The decision to travel to Davao wasn't easy for Manny. His schedule was filled with political commitments, meetings with foreign investors, and charitable events already planned. However, something in the raw sincerity of that letter touched him deeply, awakening memories of his own childhood in General Santos City, when he dreamed of opportunities that seemed unattainable for a poor boy from the Philippines. The trip from Manila to Davao was conducted with absolute discretion, only his driver and personal security, Ernesto, accompanying him on the private jet. During the flight, Manny reread the letter several times, trying to understand how 2 lives so similar in origin had taken such distinct paths after that night in Las Vegas. The verdant landscape of the Philippines stretched below, a mosaic of tropical islands that harbored stories of struggle and overcoming like his own. The provincial hospital of Davao, with its peeling walls and crowded corridors, contrasted drastically with the first-rate medical facilities that Pacquiao frequented. At reception, no one expected one of the country's biggest celebrities to appear without prior notice, causing a commotion among patients and staff. With characteristic humility, Manny distributed smiles and autographs while being led to the room where Datu Hidalgo faced his final days. The sight of his former rival was impactful, even for someone accustomed to the wounds and scars of boxing. Hidalgo, once an athlete with an impressive physique and intimidating presence, was reduced to a skeletal figure connected to tubes and monitors, emitting weak signs of life. His eyes, however, maintained the same intense gleam that had faced Pacquiao in the center of the ring so many years ago, now amplified by surprise at recognizing the unexpected visitor. Beside the bed, a skinny boy with bright eyes observed the scene with evident admiration, unable to believe that his idol was really there, just a few steps away. Raymart Hidalgo wore a faded t-shirt with the image of Pacquiao raising the world champion belt, contrasting with the surreal situation of that meeting. The initial silence was broken only by the father's contained sob, who tried to raise his trembling hand in a gesture that mixed greeting and apology. No words needed to be spoken initially. Manny approached the bed and, in a gesture that surprised even Ernesto, firmly held Hidalgo's bony hand. His eyes conveyed a clear message. The past was over, forgiveness already granted even before the visit. The heavy atmosphere of the hospital room seemed to gradually dissipate as 2 ring warriors reunited now in completely different circumstances. During the next 2 hours, Hidalgo gathered his last energies to tell stories that Manny had never heard. How he sold his only pair of shoes to buy a ticket to Manila for his first professional fight. how he faced prejudice for his indigenous origins in the international boxing circuit, how he hid the severity of his illness even from his wife, Ligaya, in the first years after diagnosis. Each word revealed a complex man, whose bitterness masked a life of struggles that extended far beyond the ring. Raymart observed the conversation with fascination, memorizing every gesture and expression of Pacquiao. When he finally mustered the courage to show some videos of his training on his old cell phone, Manny immediately recognized the raw talent that just needed proper guidance. The boy possessed the same agile movement that characterized the beginning of Pacquiao's career, combined with surprising power for his physical structure. More importantly, his eyes revealed that hungry determination that no trainer can teach. At the end of the visit, Hidalgo asked for a few minutes alone with Manny, sending his son to fetch water. With a weak but determined voice, he explained that he didn't want Raymart to know about his defamation campaign against Pacquiao, as he feared destroying the hero who inspired the boy to continue training despite the difficulties. He asked that if Manny decided to help his son, he would never reveal the father's mistakes, allowing the boy to preserve worthy memories after his departure. When Pacquiao left the hospital late that afternoon, the sun was setting over the Mindanao Sea, painting the sky with orange hues that symbolized the closing of a cycle. In the backseat of the car, Manny remained in reflective silence, mentally reviewing all the rivalries he had cultivated throughout his career, questioning how many other complex stories existed behind the faces he had faced in the ring. The truth revealed by Hidalgo had exposed not only his own vulnerability, but the inherent fragility of all myths built in the sports world. A week after the hospital visit, Manny received news of Datu Hidalgo's passing. The funeral, held in a small church in Davao, saw Pacquiao's discreet presence, arriving without announcement and remaining at the back during the ceremony. He observed from a distance as Ligaya consoled Raymart, who maintained impressive composure for a boy his age, as if he had already learned to face adversities with the silent dignity of a true fighter. 3 days later, Ernesto drove Manny to the improvised gym where Raymart trained. The place, an old warehouse with a zinc roof and unfinished concrete walls, housed worn equipment and a ring elevated by wooden blocks. Approximately 20 young men shared the limited space, training with impressive dedication despite the precarious conditions. Among them, Raymart stood out not only for his technique, but for the intensity with which he attacked the worn punching bag. The trainer, Efren Dagohoy, a former middleweight fighter with a visibly broken nose and eyebrows marked by scars, immediately recognized the illustrious visitor. Pacquiao's presence transformed the gym's atmosphere, with young boxers paralyzed in admiration, observing every movement of the living legend. With characteristic simplicity, Manny greeted each of them, distributing words of encouragement before asking to observe a complete training session. For 2 hours, Pacquiao attentively observed Raymart's work, noting technical details that needed adjustment: the slightly elevated elbow in the right jab, the tendency to lower his guard after offensive combinations, the subtle imbalance when dodging to the left. When he finally climbed into the improvised ring for some demonstrations, reverent silence took over the entire warehouse, young boxers and curious onlookers crowding the entrances to witness the historic moment. At the end of the session, Manny invited Raymart and Ligaya for a private conversation. With sensitivity not to offend the dignity of the grieving family, he proposed an arrangement that respected Hidalgo's last wish. The boy would continue training in Davao for 6 more months, during which Pacquiao would send proper equipment and an assistant trainer to complement Dagohoy's work. After this period, if progress was satisfactory, Raymart would be invited for tests at Pacquiao's official academy in Manila, with a scholarship included so he wouldn't abandon his formal education. The following 6 months transformed not just the small gym in Davao, but the entire community around it. The arrival of new equipment, discreetly sponsored by Pacquiao, elevated the technical level of all young boxers, while the assistant trainer, Vicente Laurel, Manny's former sparring partner, introduced contemporary training methods that complemented Dagohoy's traditional approach. What began as an individual project expanded organically, benefiting dozens of children who, like Raymart, found in boxing an alternative to extreme poverty. For Raymart, each day represented a step toward the dream he shared with his father. Mornings were dedicated to school, where his academic performance improved significantly, motivated by the condition imposed by Pacquiao. Afternoons and early evenings belonged to boxing, with intensive sessions that tested his physical and mental limits. Gradually, the shy boy from the hospital transformed into a disciplined athlete, channeling grief for his father's loss into unwavering determination. Ligaya, initially reluctant to accept Pacquiao's help out of family pride, gradually recognized the genuine intention behind the gesture. On the rare occasions when Manny visited Davao to monitor Raymart's progress, he was received with a simple dinner at the Hidalgo family's small house. During these visits, stories about Datu were shared, preserving his memory as a brave fighter and dedicated father without mentioning the resentments of the past. The decisive moment came during a small regional tournament, organized to test the progress of the young boxers. Raymart faced older and more experienced opponents, demonstrating not just improved technique, but also the mental resilience that defines great champions. In the final, even bleeding from a cut on his left eyebrow, he refused to back down, winning by unanimous decision. Backstage, Pacquiao recognized in the boy's determined gaze the same fire that had propelled him from the streets of General Santos City to the biggest boxing stages in the world. The morning after the competition, Manny invited Raymart and Ligaya to the hotel where he was staying. There, in the presence of representatives from his educational foundation and technical team, he formalized the invitation for the young man to move to Manila, where he would attend a quality school while training at the modern facilities of the Pacquiao Academy. The proposal included accommodation for Ligaya, who could accompany her son and work in the administration of the training center if she wished. The mother's silent tears, mixed with the son's restrained smile, sealed the agreement that honored Hidalgo's memory far beyond what he had ever imagined in his hospital bed. Raymart's arrival in Manila marked the beginning of a new phase in his journey. Adapting to the bustling life of the capital, the young boxer faced the challenge of balancing intensive training with studies at a private school where his classmates came from completely different socio-economic realities. In the first months, the feeling of not belonging was compensated by the determination to honor his mother's sacrifice, who had left behind her support network in Davao to accompany him. At Pacquiao's main academy, Raymart found a professional environment that daily tested his limits. Training alongside established champions and international prospects, the boy from Davao needed to overcome the initial intimidation to prove his worth. Manny, always attentive to his protege's development, intervened only when necessary, allowing the young man to face his own battles and develop the independence essential for growth as an athlete and person. On a particularly significant morning, Pacquiao invited selected journalists to observe a sparring session at the academy. Without prior warning to Raymart, he publicly announced that Datu Hidalgo's son represented the future of Filipino boxing, revealing for the first time the connection between the promising youth and his former rival. The story of reconciliation on the hospital bed, carefully edited to preserve the dignity of both families, moved the national sports press, transforming what could have been just another case of sports patronage into a powerful narrative of redemption and honor. The impact of the revelation was immediate. Sponsorship offers emerged for proper equipment and supplementation, while invitations to international youth tournaments began to arrive. Ligaya, initially concerned about the exposure, found comfort in how Pacquiao managed the situation, protecting Raymart from excessive expectations while opening doors that would remain closed without his influence. The historic rivalry between Pacquiao and Hidalgo, once marked by bitterness, gradually transformed into a symbol of reconciliation that inspired young boxers throughout the Philippine archipelago. On a quiet afternoon, 6 months after moving to Manila, Manny invited Raymart for a morning run in Rizal Park, away from the curious eyes of the academy. During the course, between labored breaths and sweat running down their faces, he shared for the first time technical details of the historic fight against Hidalgo, revealing to the son how his father had been a formidable opponent who deserved all respect. He described specific blows, strategies, and critical moments of the combat, painting an honorable portrait of Datu as a ring warrior. At the end of that run, Sitting in the shade of a centennial tree overlooking Manila Bay, Pacquiao handed Raymart a small, carefully preserved package. Inside were a pair of worn gloves, the same ones Hidalgo had worn that night in Las Vegas, kept all those years as a reminder of one of the most challenging fights of his career. The gift symbolized more than a transfer of sporting legacy. It represented the continuity of a story that transcended rivalries, connecting two families that, despite distinct paths, shared the same warrior essence that defines the indomitable spirit of the Philippines. As the sun set on the horizon of Manila, young Raymart held those gloves with reverence, finally understanding that he carried with him not just his father's dream, but a greater responsibility with his own journey.
Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next cases.